Jeff Harman has been an astrologer for more than 3 decades, utilizing a variety of systems including traditional or classical Western astrology, Vedic astrology, Kabbalistic astrology, and astrolocation astrology. Jeff spent 10 years in Beverly Hills and has a remarkable client base and databank of thousands of case studies. Jeff has spoken for Eons, MUFON, and Joshua Tree Retreat Center. He has been a guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, The Veritas Show, and numerous other radio, TV, and web shows. He joins us today to take a look at some of the problems we see in our world today, and we'll talk about solutions. And, you know, folks, this might seem like something out of the norm for the Bob Tuskin Show to cover, but as they say, as above, so below, and I'm very much interested to see if we can provide any astrological insights, because at the end of the day, everyone else is running around and around in a circle, and if we can learn from this, we should keep an open mind, a critical mind, and do our due diligence in looking at the information. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to kind of take a couple steps back and see what works and what doesn't work, and try to understand this perspective brought to you by his research in astrology. Without further ado, I'm going to bring Jeff Harman on. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing real good. Thanks for having me on, Bob.
All right, so Jeff, my wife is very much into astrology, and she very much believes that your normal astrology of, you know, this guy's a Cancer, that guy's an Aries, that doesn't quite fit, that there's more to it, and it's a lot more in depth, and it's kind of our surface level understanding doesn't really, you know, meet the true nature and the true expertise that is brought to us in astrology. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, I think that couldn't be more true, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's probably one of the biggest pet peeves of mine is people say to me all the time, well, I'm a Aries or a Taurus or a Pisces, and I hear so many other astrologers saying that. And it really kind of makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because I really think it's demeaning to the human soul to have anyone be told they are their sun sign, when anything could be further from the truth. You know, I started doing astrology a long time ago in the 70s, and I always, and thank God for my mother, literally, because she was really pretty wise in terms of the soul as well as astrology. And it's always been my theory, and I know she thought that too, that we are souls having a physical experience, and the astrology is not us, it's what we're experiencing. And if you look at it that way, that's a whole different perspective. And I think it's really demeaning when people say, oh, my sun sign. There's millions of people born with the sun in a sign every month, and there's not a single one of them, not one of them is the same. You look in their eyes sometimes. And I think, you know, it's really uplifting to the soul when you say, hey, you know, the astrology is just influences, and maybe even more importantly, it's influences that we created.
Interesting. That sits better with me than the pigeonholing that is often used by saying such and such person is a this or a that. That never sat well with me. That seemed to be kind of, you know, a stereotype, if you will.
Oh, it is. And I call it love, light, and cluelessness. It's the love and light part's good. It's the cluelessness that doesn't really work. What it is you can't you can't put infinity into a square box. Now, astrology is really accurate. I actually was fairly skeptical of it at first. What got me into it was in the 70s, my mother started nailing my girlfriend so well. I said, wait a minute. I said, what are you doing here? I said, I want to learn this. And she started showing me, and I was really amazed at just how accurate it showed personality traits. I call them influences. And that's how I got into it. I was actually a real science head in the late 70s, early 80s. In fact, I actually did forensics work in concert with state and federal agencies. We were doing voice print analysis and acoustical analysis, and I was all about science. So I had a real problem at first accepting that, something as woo-woo as astrology would really be, have efficacy, and it does. The more you get into the ancient systems, it is scientific. It's very mathematical.
Interesting. Well, I want to understand more about why it works and how it works, and so on and so forth, to then shift our attention to taking a look at what's happening on our planet today financially. We know without astrology aside, sometimes we have just common sense and paying attention here. Well, I take that back. Common sense isn't so common anymore. But nonetheless, sometimes we just know that the Federal Reserve, based on fractional reserve banking and the motives of these wealthy families, is bound for failure, and we are being indebted as slaves, and so on and so forth. We don't need astrology to tell us any of this. We can look at the trends. We can look at the state of our planet and kind of get an understanding of this. But I want to understand how astrology speaks to these issues and where it sees everything heading. But before I do that, I feel like I have to understand why exactly it works. Why does the Vedic astrology and the Kabbalistic astrology and so on and so forth, why is it? Because I get the impression that a lot of people, including yourself, really believe that it gives us some valuable insights. But why and how is that the case?
Well, that's a very complex question, which isn't simply answered, and I don't sit here and claim that I have, quote unquote, all the answers. What I will say is this: we can go backwards. Here's one document that I think offers that up pretty well and may come to a summary for us a little bit quicker than maybe some of the other ways we could explain it. There's something called the Tatrayaka, or some people call it the Tatrayaka Upanishad, which goes a long way back in India. Now, it's just one of many. There's also some really amazing Kabbalistic documents that point this out as well. And essentially, just to stick with the Tatrayaka, it's a Upanishad, which is a basic scripture in the Vedantic, which talks about how our auras have 5 layers, and that it really reinforces that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And what's more interesting is that some of the vernacular used in it, and one in particular, is called graha, which in the Sanskrit language actually means planet. But more importantly, graha actually refers to seizer or grasper of the aura. And even to the skeptics who, as I've worked a lot with physicists and people who are very, 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 very left-brained, and they're like, I just can't even go here. And then yet they'll say, you're right, this was a period in my life, or this was an event that came up, or this was a time period or a location I lived. And I got to say, it's right on. Well, if you go back to the Tatrayaka Upanishad alone, the seizer or grasper of the aura means that every individual is influenced in their own unique energetic pattern. DNA has been now proven to transmit and receive various, we could say, very high frequency, some people call it cosmic rays. It doesn't really fit into the electromagnetic spectrum, so to speak, in terms of frequency. But there are harmonics of the planets which have clearly been measured with brain waves to prove that it influences us. Particularly, a lot of people know Mercury goes retrograde. Now, for anyone listening, retrograde just simply means that the planet appears to be going backwards. And astronomers always laugh at that. They go, well, the planets never go backwards. Well, of course they don't, but they do from our vantage point. So that's what I like about the ancient astrology, as well as some of the modern too. It really is astronomical. In other words, it's using a lot of astronomy in concert with the symbolism of astrology. So the DNA appears to resonate at various harmonic frequencies. And I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This may be the real matrix. And again, going back to the Vedantic astrology, we've all heard the word karma. And there's I believe the astrology is commensurate with what we've created. Now that all already presupposes that there was reincarnation, which I really believe there is. There's a lot of paranormal as well as clinical evidence that supports that. Some people don't believe in reincarnation. I really do. In fact, the more I study astrology, the more I'm absolutely convinced of it. There's one of my favorite documents, which is called, and that'll kind of summarize what you're saying is how does it work. In Hebrew, there's a document called the Sefer Haggadah. Now, some people pronounce that slightly different, but what that means, Sefer is book and Haggadah is the legends. And I'm not quite so sure that they're legends because it's an amazing book. It's 600 or 700 pages thick. And it talks in there how the birth chart isn't really the most important. What it is the conception. So when conception happens, there's a silver cord that's attached to the embryo as the seed takes effect, as the sperm and the seed take effect in the mother. And that the angel leads that soul that's assigned or attached to that embryo around for the period of gestation, which could be 9 months, could be, some have early, some later, but it's approximately 9 months. And that right at the time the soul is going to be tied in to the body, metaphorically, and that's, of course, the birth, it's really at first breath. And I never knew that was really so until my son was born, and I was holding my wife's hand, and she was shaking from the epidural. And by the way, I might add, my son, we actually conceived him with astrology. I do a lot of conception charts for women where we look at when is an auspicious time for them to conceive. And I've actually worked in concert with doctors doing stuff like that, where there's been in vitro or what have you. And what we do is we base it off the woman's birth chart, but not to stray too far here. What happened is my wife was having this child, our son, and she was going C-section. And by the way, I also got to pick the day that he was born. And she's shaking away, and the doctor opened her up. And I was looking up over the top of the tent, and I noticed the minute they pulled the child out, I saw 2 light orbs come in the room. I did not see wings. I didn't see any shapes. I just saw 2 lights. And it was the most breathtaking moment of my life, because when those joined, he cried, and it just illuminated. And I have to tell you, when they stand me up at the end of this incarnation and say, what was the best part, I'm going to say, that's probably it right there. It was the most magical moment of my life, and it corroborates this story in the Sefer Haggadah, which is the angel's tie, or the guardian angel, ties the soul to the body at first breath, but more importantly, and this is the point of this whole conversation, there's a mark that's between our nose and our upper lip that divides the right and left lip. That mark was put there to knock out the lamp, so to speak. And when you think about it, when a child is born, at no time is a human being more susceptible to its environment and its conditions than at birth. If you don't have parents, or at least a mother, to feed you, take care of you, protect you, you might not survive, and very likely won't. So what's interesting is, in fact, medicine says they can't see. And my child, just to finish that story, I walked around when I saw those lights, and he reached up and grabbed my thumbs and looked right at me, and they can't see because they put that silver in their eyes. It was the most magical moment of my life, and again, it really was wonderful for me doing this kind of spiritual consulting, because it gave me even more of an appreciation for some of these ancient documents. And I believe the astrology isn't us, it's the influences of the karmas, both good and challenging, that we come in with. And just to round out the section here, one of the things that has always been a source of contention between religions and this type of work is astrology. I have a very fascinating document it's in the 12th century, from a group of rabbis in the Northern European countries, Spain, England, Prague, Austria, of course, and then I think there was one in France as well. And they had written this letter collectively, and of course back in the 12th century, it was not sent by email. It was brought down by messenger to Cairo, Egypt. And the great Maimonides, whom some people may or may not know, was a rabbi who was considered in Jerusalem to be an extremely gifted healer, as well as a wonderful authority in religion. And they wanted his opinion on what astrology was, all about and why it had so much value. And they were able to help people not only through medicine, because medical astrology is amazing, and then further they were able to help people get through hard times and prosper in business. And he wrote back scathing attacks. Oh, that's not to be used. You should only believe in God. And it's interesting because I read this letter from time to time over the years, and it's clearly one of the most central topics that all religions, Christianity, Judaism, on and on and on, have had to contend with. And that is God to be consulted, or is astrology? Well, I agreed with Maimonides. If people live their lives with only astrology and have no faith, no ability to believe that their goals, their aspirations, and things that they want can come true, either through prayer or meditation, you're pretty much up the creek. So where does astrology come in? Because I also disagree with Maimonides, and I've also disagreed with the churches and so on and so forth. They make this out to be the work of the devil, right? And this is a huge topic. So what I've noticed is that it's somewhere in the middle. I agree with both sides, and I disagree with both sides. And it puts, again, right back to the whole topic we started on, and that is, what is astrology? What the heck is it? And why does it work? And, what degree should you use it, and what shouldn't you? And that, I think, like anything, takes responsibility. You got to take responsibility for your own actions, and yet, we could all drive around in our cars too and say, I'm going to believe in God, and forget the stop and go lights and forget the speedometers. I'm just going to trust in God.
You're going to get hit.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Maybe better to do both. Look at your speedometer, obey the traffic laws,
yeah,
and believe in God. There you go.
I like that. Well, I think it's very interesting, and it seems to have brought us perspective on some of what's going on right now in the world thus far. And, of course, we can take a look at the present and what you've been able to see, but that's no fun. We want to look at the future. And I think that's part of the fascination people have with astrology. It's because everybody wants to predict the future, don't they?
Yes, they do.
And I think that right there is the draw for a lot of people to take a closer look at astrology. Now, as you just pointed out in many different ways, astrology doesn't predict the future. But what can astrology tell us about the future?
Well, it predicts the probable outcome based on current states of consciousness.
Okay.
And that's an interesting way to view it.
All right, so what are the probable outcomes based on our current state of consciousness that you see for, let's just start with the finance stuff. Let's start with the money.
Well, as you rightly said at the beginning of the show, one of the things that is clear, I have a lot, I really can't mention names, but I actually have clients who are, of course now it's Yellen, but who have had meetings on a regular basis with Bernanke in the past and others in the past. And I've got clients who are in very high positions in world banking and international financing, and as well as many other areas of business. And it's interesting to hear from these places. Again, I can't disclose who they are, but I've been very blessed to have a wide client base, and I can tell you, anybody out there with an IQ above room temperature knows you don't need astrology to tell you it is a precarious situation we're in right now. And this all goes right back to the petrodollar, to the entire financial structure of the Western world. The BRICS nations right now are clearly collecting more and more on their side. China and Russia are buying gold like it's going out of style. The banks, particularly in Europe, and of course we don't hear much in the U.S., it's very veiled, but they're in deep trouble. The derivatives markets, the bond market, and the treasury bond market is a train wreck. One my client said that Deutsche Bank is like a silo of derivatives as the Fed and other organizations mop up the flushing of U.S. Treasury bonds. And as you know, the only way, in the past to buy oil was in USD, and that allowed the United States dollar to be the de facto world reserve currency. And China and Russia particularly, and the BRICS nations, are seeking to change that. In fact, it's already been changing. And this is a very precarious and dangerous situation because I don't believe the bankers who are above the countries are going to allow this to go the full stretch. I hope I'm wrong. I hope there's a political and way to make this work. But it doesn't appear that Russia particularly and China are heeding anything other than going in their own direction, and the BRICS nations is proof of it. And Saudi Arabia is now jumping ship and heading over there. And that's an interesting thing because Saudi Arabia was the hinge pin of this whole, petrodollar. And when we look back at World War I, which is an enigma as to what it was really all about, World War II is clearly the model that we see that's been going on for a long, long time, and that is you fund both sides. We don't care if they're tyrants, in fact, better if they are, and then you let them do whatever they're going to do, and then we get to come in and save the day, problem, reaction, solution. And I'm not so sure, and I may sound conspiratorial here, but what we're seeing right now in Iraq and ISIS and all that isn't also a product of that. It's look at Hitler. He was funded, so was Japan, by the same bankers that funded us. And, I don't want to say too much here, but I actually have some pretty overwhelming proof. It was issued, it's right out of the U.S. Treasury Department. I've seen the bonds. I've seen them stacked in 4-truck pallets to the ceiling. And, people would say, oh, how can you prove that? Well, it is provable. And it's again the banking systems. They don't care about human life, and to quote George Carlin, they don't care about us at all, not even a little bit. And this is the way they will implement new systems. No one will agree on a new system unless it is a crisis, and there has to be a problem to stop in order for that intervention to happen, and then people will go with it. And I can tell you the astrology is showing, in fact, I put this out I think 2 or 3 years ago in my newsletters, where we are currently right now in a Uranus-Pluto square series. Every single time these has happened, and I've gone back a few hundred years, every single time these two have squared off in what we call hard geometric aspects. And I've gone all the way back to the 1700s and prior. Every single one of them was major wars. The 7 years of wars in the 1700s. In fact, I have a newsletter that's it's called my previous newsletter on my website at jeffharman.com, and you can just page through it. It's pages and pages of research, which basically shows every single time these two planets have gone in either a square, which is a 90-degree aspect, or an opposition, or a conjunction, it's been a crap storm. And not only has it been a crap storm financially, there's revolutions, there's revolt. It's interesting right now to turn on the Fox News, or particularly Fox News. I call it the Obama rant, because that's all they do is scream and holler and jump up and down about what Obama's doing. And never before in the history of my life, and I've been watching TV since, the 60s, and never before have I seen this much dissension in this country like this. Even the Vietnam War was not like this. This is bizarre right now. And when you take what's going on with this potential global jihad and this whole caliphate that's going on, we are clearly looking at a world here where the terrorism, I think, is going to. It's just a matter of time before something happens. And the astrology shows that. Between now and 2020, we are going to see life as we know it change. And the reason why, there's an ancient astrological system, and I found this a number of years ago. This was actually done in translations out of Egypt and, of all places, Iraq. Iraq was famous for many texts being translated, and so was Spain. Many of the Egyptian and Vedantic and Greek texts have been being translated over the last 20 years. And it's pretty astounding how accurate some of that stuff is. It is not like modern astrology. It is very technical, and it's really, really astounding. It proves there's angels and spirits and all that stuff. Long story short, there's a system called the Great Conjunctions. And I'm 100% certain the Masonic crew knew about it. And in fact, Nostradamus knew about them, in my opinion. In fact, the founders of this country knew about them because the United States was founded right after the last great the last great conjunction. That was in 1702, and of course it ensued in 1776 is when the Declaration was signed. But they knew this, and there was a lot of movements, I think, in a very esoteric way that they knew all this was coming down and the new world was going to be created, and it was going to be the power center. Well, the interesting thing is the next, what we call mutation conjunction in this ancient Egyptian astrology is 2020. And many people had asked me, and they said, well, geez, what do you think is going to happen with the Mayan calendar? And I kept going, I don't know, nothing. I can't come up with it. Of course, we saw the movies with John Cusack flying away as L.A. crumbled behind him in the plane, and, all this stuff on all the radio shows and the TV shows were just pounding the Mayan calendar in 2012. And I couldn't come up with anything on the broadside of a barn with that. I said, I can't come up with anything. But 2020, I can. And right now, up into 216, I can. We are in a clear area of major transformation and change financially. And I always say, follow the money, and you'll see when the next war is going to be. And I hope it doesn't go there. But it certainly seems to be leaning that way. I mean, look at China right now. Russia just poured close to $1 billion into its military, and it may be more than that. China is ramping up like crazy. The United States, God only knows what they have with their black ops things. I have a couple clients who are really knowledgeable in the military area, and one of them said to me, yeah, if you look at the United States' arsenal up against China and Russia, we got more than them put together. He says, that's not even thinking about the black ops projects, which are, he said, colossal, absolutely off the charts colossal.
I want to pick on something you said about the jihadist, because many of my listeners feel that that's being contrived, and that there are, I mean, don't get me wrong, we do know that there are extremists, and that they very much despise the West. However, we have events like 9/11 that many of us have profound questions about, and we see that we're being painted a picture that sometimes isn't fair to Islam, perhaps. What would you have to say about that?
Well, I remember 9/11 because that happened right before my boy was born. In fact, astrologically, I was talking to another astrologer, And I didn't want to get married right then because I saw there was a big event coming, and that was 9/11.
Interesting.
That was on a Saturn-Uranus-Pluto. Yeah, it was a Saturn-Pluto opposition, I believe it was, but don't quote me. I would say to you that it's very questionable that most of the terrorists, quote unquote, that are surfacing as leaders right now came out of U.S. prisons not long ago, let go by the very president that's in office right now. I find that very questionable. Secondly, again, buildings don't come down like sparklers from jet fuel, and we know that got us into Iraq. They tend to use the problem reaction solution, and
Sure.
just like Hitler, you fund a maniac, we don't care, give him the money. Millions upon millions upon millions of dollars was funded into Germany and Japan. In fact, Japan didn't even have any steel. We borrowed them the money and then sold them the steel, and then they shot it back at us. And there's many who believe that there were some real questionable issues surrounding the entire Pearl Harbor attack as well, that was kind of let open to happen. And there may be some truth to that. I would say, again, follow the money. It's always about the power and control of systems. And I think what is the most dangerous thing in the world right now is that if there was ever a time that something like the book 1984, George Orwell, could ever come to play, in fact, I think what could happen coming up here with technology, the control of food, Monsanto, to name one, and energy, as well as your ability to access finances and have them, is now more than ever. It makes 1984 by George Orwell look like a baby book, because not only is there things controllable in all those areas, but genetics, and not to sound too conspiratorial, but mind control is a real reality. And there is stuff going on with that, and let alone touching the chemtrails and all that clearly it's there. The only thing I say is, thank God, literally, they seem to be thwarted from being able to do all that they want to do. But the scary part is they will do whatever they can do. And when I say they, I'm talking about the people above the countries, above the politicians. And I think they'll do whatever they can do to get their new system in.
I think you're right. And they're going to utilize...
They don't care about human life at all.
No, and they're going to utilize every crisis that they can. Who is it that said?
Or create them.
Or create them, yeah. Never let a good crisis go to waste. I think that was
but
Rob.
There are terrorists, and there
Sure.
is stuff going on. There's no question. But the thing of it is, you take someone like Hitler. He was a maniac. Now, what happens to a maniac when you give him millions upon millions of dollars in resources? What does he do? He implements his maniac system. Not only did he kill a bunch of Jews over there, though some people think they didn't, I think he did, and I think he killed a lot of other people too.
Yeah.
And this is the whole point is that when you deal in these upper levels of humanity, or they're not human. I'm really questioning how some of these bankers could even call themselves human when you would allow that kind of atrocities to happen and fund. Look what's going on in ISIS over there right now. I've heard a lot of rumors that there are some very questionable resources that these people have attained, and not only are they're not acting like a bunch of crazy Arabs. They're acting like a very tactical, intelligent military group. And that I find is very interesting. I had a high-ranking military special ops client of mine tell me that was one of his major fears, was there would be some uprising or funding to a global jihad. which could just turn into mayhem. Nostradamus actually had a quatrains that my mother had given me. There's been many interpretations of Nostradamus, and there's also, in my opinion, been some pretty big misinterpretations too of Nostradamus. But one in particular I have, it fits what's going on right now. And Nostradamus is hard to transcode because he wrote in code. So it's hard to figure out what times he's really talking about. So it lends itself to people conjecturing, oh, we think it's now, or we think it's then. And one of the quatrains that my mother had given me back in the early 80s it was, and I forget who translated it, but it was pretty eerie because it kind of fits right where we're at right now, and that is, someone would become elected who would be considered the Messiah. And remember Obama? He was the light worker. He's going to fix everything. Remember the first election for Obama? You'd have thought we'd ushered in. You'd have thought Jesus returned. You know, I mean, he was the savior. And now it's not even dismal. It's almost really kind of eerie how he even looks and acts on camera right now. I think his meds are turned up or something. He's just really acting, you know, or he's got to get his meds adjusted. Something is really gone weird with this guy. And Michelle is acting.
Was that a Freudian slip, by the way? Because you know they've accused.
Actually, that was a purposeful slip.
Okay, good, yeah, because they've definitely accused her of being a man. I know that sounds crazy, but that's something I've looked into.
Michael. I mean Michelle. Yes, exactly. But seriously, I would say that what's kind of eerie is in his quatrains, it talks about how terrorism would keep advancing at a rapid rate, which would precipitate World War III. And I really hope, and I really pray, and I hope everyone else listening does too, because I really believe prayer matters. God is clearly above astrology, and I think God is clearly above all the white noise we call our consciousness and our perceptions of reality. And a lot of people say, well, geez, if God exists, why would he let all this happen? Well, that's called free will. You can do anything you want down here. You can heal people, you can help them, you can kill them, you can murder them, chop their heads off. You can do whatever you want, but your karma gets accrued. And, to anyone who's a skeptic to karma, Dr. Emoto, who wrote the book Messages in Water, basically has given a scientific proof of what many ancient documents have said for eons, and that is thoughts are literally things, and so are actions. There's not another machine or animal on this planet as divine as all of us. When we have a thought, a desire, whether it's for good, for ill, or any point in between, it's pretty magical to be able to take that desire and manifest it into an action. Go tell your computer to go turn a light switch on because it wants to see light. It doesn't do that, and it never will. And artificial intelligence is just, that's again another logistic functionality. It's not the divine creation that we all have, that we take for granted every day. And what's even more fascinating is I think this planet is almost like a cul-de-sac of, I call it the soul cauldron. We just keep pinging in and out of here until we become what I call consciously self-aware. And, people often say to me in readings, they'll say, well, geez, how can I get around these energies that are in my chart? The religions were right. Prayer, meditation, and becoming aware of what you do have. It's like an airline pilot. How do they land the plane safely? And face it, we have a crash now and then, but airlines, for the ratio, they're pretty safe. And the reason they are is because they really, really, really pay attention to their conditions. They got guys in control towers, they got satellites, they got constant monitoring of their environment, getting feedback, and then taking intelligent reaction to what they see. I just flew not too long ago. I was amazed. The pilot jumps on a radio, and he goes, or on the intercom, and he goes, well, folks, we've got some turbulence coming up here in about 7 minutes. I thought, okay, 7 minutes. Why didn't you say 10 or 5? And sure enough, I looked at my watch, and 7 minutes, just almost to the T. And boom, boom, bang, boom, we're bouncing all over the place. And of course, what did he do? He told the stewardesses not to break out the coffee. Now think about that. If you got hot coffee, that could have been a problem. So, and he says, well, we're going to take it up. We should be through this here in another few minutes. And of course, another few minutes, we were out of it. Boom, broke out the coffee. So, that analogy is very similar to astrology. And I think we're in turbulence right now. And even though the New World Order and whoever else these bozos think they are trying to incarcerate the human race, I don't think they're going to ultimately be successful. And the reason why is I do believe that this place is divine. And every time some totalitarian regime, including the Romans all the way back, they've never succeeded. They always failed. Something magically made them fail.
Good over evil.
They're evil. That's right.
Yeah, and good always prevails is what you're saying.
It always does in the end.
Interesting. Jeff, one of the things the powers that shouldn't be, as I like to call them, to use for their eugenics campaigns are things that effectively diminish our health. And a lot of times we volunteer for this by eating the GMOs and the high fructose corn syrup and all the junk that they put out there in our food supply. And many people, whether they're ignorant or not, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but they just eat this stuff and they eat it up and they're killing themselves and certain interests like this. And then we have the medical establishment that doesn't really help on a lot of different issues. If I get my leg chopped off in an accident or something, Jeff, I'm going to go to the hospital. But for everything else, for everything else, I question, what we've been told with allopathic medicine today. Astrology speaks to health, doesn't it?
It does. Ayurvedic astrology and this amazing corpus of medieval back to Egyptian astrology is astounding. Now, there's two types of medical astrology. One is you can look at your birth chart and see cycles. And invariably, I've got a lot of doctors who are clients. I've got psychologists that are clients and psychiatrists that are clients. And it's interesting. Just the other day, I had a doctor who is a naturopath and got really fed up with the allopathic world. And what's great about Arizona and even in California, there's a lot of naturopathics that are emerging because they're getting sick and tired of having their hands tied behind their backs because the only thing they can do is prescribe the AMA-approved pharmaceuticals. Now, there are some that are worthy, and they do serve their purpose for the times that they are needed. But long term, most people know there's a lot of side effects. I actually had a girlfriend that I lived with for several years back in the 90s who worked, and I won't mention any names, but in a very large pharmaceutical organization in Chicago area. And I was able to she was quite high up there, and I really got an appreciation for what goes on in the pharmaceutical industry being with her. I saw the tremendous amount of science that goes into it, and also I saw the profit that they make. And what's more interesting is all the politics. And it takes over $1 billion to bring a drug to market. That's an average. And then when you start tacking on what does it take to put the commercial in front of you, and also half the commercials, all the side effects that you're likely to get. So when I walked away from that, I just went, wow, what an industry. I mean, and of course, it's got that phrase that all those politicians love, but it creates jobs. Well, great. But in the meantime, we can buy turmeric at, what is it now, $6 a pound? That is probably the most powerful antioxidant. It's the best. And I've heard doctors tell me this. I take turmeric every day, not the powder, the raw root. You can actually go on Amazon.com and buy it. I always recommend the Indian blend because the Indian stuff seems to be stronger to me. But what I do is I chop it up in a mortar and pestle. And you can put a little olive oil, like a half a teaspoon, and about an eighth or a quarter of a teaspoon of fresh ground black pepper, and drink it. Just got to be careful because You'll look like a pumpkin if you start chewing it, because it stains everything, including your fingers and the countertops. But here's the interesting thing. I do like allopathic medicine from one standpoint. The doctors are very knowledgeable, but they're kept from really getting into the healing modalities because they're completely controlled by the pharmaceutical lobbyists at the AMA and the whole system. And the ones breaking away, getting in the naturopathic, are in the best position because they now have the really good background in all their training, but now they're starting to get into the nutrition and the herbs and the vibrational energies and homeopathic as well as naturopathic, all these different things that really gives them the tools that they wanted but never could get in the allopathic world. And like turmeric, it lowers cholesterol. It gives you better good cholesterol. In fact, they say it lowers high blood pressure and mysteriously seems to raise low blood pressure. And it's wonderful for stroke victims because what it does is it creates more elasticity in the veins and the whole cardiovascular system. I'm in my mid-50s. I went to the doctor, and he goes, God, you get cholesterol like a 20-year-old. I said, yeah, must be that Lipitor. Of course, I don't take Lipitor, but I felt like saying that. And I just take turmeric. And half the people I know on Lipitor, they don't feel good. And that's fine. Take your Lipitor, but check out turmeric. And I always say, keep seeing the doctors. The doctors are smart. I mean, allopathic medical testing is pretty amazing, but it's looking at results, not causes. So it's like checking your oil. It's good to do. But, when you really want to find things that work, the natural vibration of good quality foods and herbs is absolutely magical. The other day, we had a viral. I have a child in school, and I get to sample most of the viruses coming around, and because he brings them home. And, he got an ear infection, and, he did go on antibiotics, but then it came back. And there's actually a wonderful little Ayurvedic thing where you mix a paste of turmeric, also ginger, and some other things together, and you get this wonderful antiviral. It's got cloves in it, natural ground cloves. This stuff is magical. And I believe the reason it is if you subscribe to the old adage that every living thing has an angel over it saying grow, 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 well, the farther away you get from that natural off-the-vine vibration, the more it gets refined in the chemicals and things. I think the more foreign it becomes to the human body.
Interesting. One of the techniques you use when looking at astrology is interrogation astrology, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I want to, if you don't mind, I know this is a bit impromptu, but I want to do some interrogation astrology with you.
Yeah.
And I want to bring up Ebola.
Ah, okay.
One of the things I'd like to look at is where, via your astrological understandings, you see the Ebola epidemic heading, and what exactly we should know, based again on your look at astrology, about this Ebola virus.
Well, what do you mean by that last part specifically?
Well, should we be prepared? Should we be getting prepared? Should we, should we look at stocking up on different things? Are we going to see some sort of quarantine of the population? So on and so forth. I just like to get kind of your look, because a lot of people are concerned about this. They don't know where it's heading. There's a lot of fear-mongering taking place, but then again, there's a lot of people who have reason to be in fear of an epidemic like this.
Oh, yeah. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to give you my opinion. What I actually just did, and I'm glad you brought up the word interrogation. Just real briefly, interrogation astrology is probably one of the oldest types of astrology there is. Clearly came up out of Egypt, the Babylonian area, the whole ancient world used this, and it clearly was and still is used a lot in India, in Tibet, and so on and so forth. what interrogation astrology is, when you just pose this question, I just typed into the computer, I said, Bob Tuskin, where is the Ebola epidemic issue going? Are we in any danger, etc.? No, the only reason I typed that in is because this is not based on your birth chart, my birth chart, or anyone else's birth chart. It's based on your consciousness. And this is one of the most amazing type of astrology. And I've actually had some wonderful discussions with, again, physicists and psychologists and psychiatrists about this. Literally, I guarantee you, you're probably the only guy right now, right at this minute, 7 billion people on the planet asking me this question where I'm at about, this issue. Now, that's probably not the perfect example because I'm sure somebody's also concerned about it, but we're posing a question. And the interesting thing is I'm just casting a chart for the moment. J.P. Morgan, who was, as many people know, a very substantial financier, and of course for the Rockefellers, and worked a lot with the steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, or bought U.S. Steel from him. He made a good statement about that. He said, millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do, and they keep it quiet. And this was a lot of the type of astrology they'd use, divinational-wise. Okay, I'm looking at this chart, and I just cast a chart for the moment. The eastern horizon becomes you, the querent, or you're kind of asking in a way in behalf of everyone. You're saying, are we, and I would take we meaning the United States, people, populace, etc., going to see a major outbreak, or are you more saying collectively the world?
The world, and of course, we're looking at it from the perspective of here in the United States, with my case in Florida, your case in Arizona, but we have listeners all around the world. And I think that this consciousness of Ebola is something that is worldwide.
It shows the moon's void of course right now. Now, that's a term that's used when the moon is not making any major geometric aspect before it leaves a sign. Now, some astronomers laugh because they say, well, the astrology isn't right anyhow because it doesn't match the constellations. Well, they're right. It doesn't. It never has. But this, I can tell you right now, the moon's in a fixed sign and it's void of course. That's nothing will probably major happen. But it does show, I'll tell you what it shows more, is trouble with war. And that came up.
So you're taking a question about Ebola, and you're seeing something about war. How do you know this? How are you able to see this?
Well, because there's a Mars-Saturn conjunction at the midheaven, and that's an aspect of more violence and trouble. I would say that that's more on the horizon than Ebola.
So could that mean that perhaps the Ebola outbreak is not the issue itself, but that something may come from this threat known as Ebola? Again, problem, reaction, solution.
I get the Ebola threat is not that big here. That's what I get.
Even as just a figurehead?
Yeah, I don't.
You see what I mean,
right?
I'd
have to go with this chart is saying I don't get everybody's going to die or contract, or there's going to be major outbreaks in the U.S. from this.
And we're not going to be told that there is?
We could be, but I doubt it.
Okay.
I don't, if I'm reading this chart right, with the moon is an all-important timer, and with it being void of course, I would say this one's likely to be quarantined. They're going to get it under control. And I would also say, that's more where I'd have to go with this. Yep. It doesn't look that I'm seeing anything. Let me run this out a little bit more and make sure there's nothing coming up that I'm not seeing. See, what I'm doing is mathematically running out the chart. Now, in fact, if anything, this shows, I get there's going to be a lot more of it in Africa. There's going to be some of it breaking out in other countries, but I think they're going to keep it pretty tight here. That's what it shows. Yeah.
Jeff, I want to take a closer look at the war you see on the horizon. Is there a way for us to explore that?
Yeah, there is. I don't. Yeah, I can tell you there's going to be trouble. There could be. It's either going to be a false flag event or something that's a real flag event. But it looks like trouble here because Mars and Saturn are poised right at the midheaven, and they're going to what is known as a conjunction, which in plain English means as a very powerful aspect. This new moon coming up, which, as you may know, the new moons are very, very, very powerful. And that, of course, ensues this August 25th. And what I don't like about that one is the seeds sown in that one show that we may, let me just run that out a little bit more there.
When you say run that out, what are you doing right now?
Well, I'm advancing the chart. So
okay.
What you do in astrology, is particularly in this type of astrology, is you literally, there's something called an ephemeris. An ephemeris literally gets the positions of the planets that you run out. So I'm advancing the chart, and thank God I've got a computer to do it, because years ago we used to do it by hand, and that, I'd literally have to put you on hold for 15 minutes to come up with what I'm doing in seconds here. I would say there's going to be more trouble. It looks to me like it's going to be abroad. I would not be surprised if we see more trouble in the Middle East. This thing there's going to be something over there too with Russia and China. I don't know that we'll directly engage with them right away, but there's events coming down. Let me just see this here. Yeah. And that's something I hope gets thwarted. If anyone listening believes in the power of meditation and prayer, I do think we can change it. What's interesting, there's an ancient Kabbalistic model that says God is above all creation. And then there's something called the seraphims, the cherubims, and the thrones. That's three major hierarchies of angels. Quantum physics, as well as many people who study the advanced, what I call new physics. In fact, Dr. Claude Swanson, who's a good friend of mine, who wrote some amazing books. One's called the Synchronized Universe, has been stating that there's numerous tests now that confirm the slit theory test that was done back in the 1800s, which you may or may not be familiar with. That test proves that literally matter, all matter that we know, it was done in 1803 by Young. And basically, what it proves is that all matter acts with consciousness. And if it's just stupid little atoms, molecules, it couldn't do that. Well, if you take the theory that the seraphims, the cherubims, literally they say the entire creative universe is their thought form elementals. And then the thrones is where the souls like us get guided down into creation. Because beneath that there's the dominance, virtues, and powers, which is still above any physical matter. And then you get into the archangels, the angels, the spirits, and the intelligences. And that's, of course, where all the astronomers and scientists got all their stuff pointed, and they're looking at matter and gas clouds and amino acids and rotating galaxies, or the dirt under your fingernail, whatever they're looking at. So the point is that creation, or you could say the three-dimensional, five-sense world, isn't even happening until you get down into the archangel, angel, spirit, and intelligence dimension. It's what they call the third hierarchy down. And then there's the fourth hierarchy, which is, not to sound religious, but it's Lucifer, Leviathan, Satan, and Belial. And the Solomonic magic, which is old stuff, and Rome pretty much smashed that on the ground and swept it up and threw it in the bottom of the Vatican. And they know about this stuff. And there's some very fascinating documents that I've been researching for years, particularly the Psalms, that are coded riddles that prove all this stuff. In fact, the ancient astrology is all. You can actually get your guardian angel from your birth chart. You get the name of it. And I don't know how to do it other than in Hebrew, but it's pretty fascinating stuff. And you can't make this stuff up. This is not stuff I'm inventing. This is stuff that's existent out of ancient documents. And so why am I going here is because the entire universe is literally vibrating with divine intelligence. And then, anyone listening will, well, then why is there evil? Well, there's free will. And maybe that's a very parallel to the Garden of Eden story. So when you look at war and, geez, could it all end? Yes, it could. But we could also alter it by meditation and advanced intention. Because, in every biblical story you look at, God looked down to see if there was any spiritual holy people.
Right.
I don't think these are just metaphors. I think they're really true.
Jeff, I have a problem with what's become known as the secret, or the law of intention.
Right, the law of attraction, right?
Yeah, attraction. Yeah, I have a problem with it, and here's why.
I do too.
Well, good, because I think we might be on the same page with this. I think that it's Pollyannish to think that if you just sit there and think about something that it's going to happen. I believe we need to take action, that with every action there's a reaction. And yes, you want to have positive thoughts, and yes, you want to think in a way that's going to be progressive and act on those thoughts. But I don't believe for a second that somehow children in Africa who are slaughtered by machetes in a village thought about something other than whatever children's thoughts might be. And I don't believe that genocide is brought on by people thinking in a way that somehow brought that or attracted that to them.
Couldn't agree more. And you know what? You just hit on a subject that I really is dear to my heart. And I have to tell you, let's just take, for instance, this whole positive thinking thing I really agree with. But when you back it up, the whole seeds for this thing was primarily brought out by Andrew Carnegie and Napoleon Hill. In fact, Tony Robbins is Napoleon Hill on steroids. He just must have drank 42 lattes before he got in front of the microphone. But here's the point. If you take Abraham Hicks, she's the one many people may know her as Esther Hicks. She channels Abraham. And about 20 years ago, she's the one who came out with the law of attraction, the law of allowing, the law of deliberate creation, and all these wonderful things, which I couldn't agree with more. But here's the problem. And you hit it right on the head. I love this because this is something I talk about. In fact, I just gave a talk about this at IONS, which is Institute of Noetic Science.
Oh, really?
Edgar Mitchell. Yeah. And one of the things I was talking about is it's an interactive universe. See, if you look at if thoughts are literally things, in fact, why Dr. Emoto can take a photograph of water after someone prays over it, or conversely, he can take some water where a murder happened and it looks like gobbledygook, is because the entire universe around us is permeated with something called etheric vitality or etheric energy. It's very divine and it's very magical. But here's the interesting thing. If that's the case, I would change the law of attraction to the law of resonance, because that's more really what it is. You are attracting what you're resonating with. This is, and see, that is the law of attraction, but it's a deeper law of attraction because in physics there's something called sympathetic vibration. If you smack a tuning fork at 440 and you run over there, oops, look at the string is vibrating at 440. That's sympathetic vibration. And see, the ancient Egyptians and many of these occult organizations knew this stuff. This is the flag, patriotism. If we can get somebody, advertisers use it every day. If we can get you to believe whatever it is that we want you to believe, you start resonating with, oh, yeah, you're right. Oh, yeah, geez, I get that. So all of a sudden, you've opened the door. So when you start resonating with this stuff, you now are on kind of like the same wavelength, if you will. So here's the interesting thing. The positive thinkers are right. You know, if everybody who took a Tony Robbins course, took all these other classes, would become instant millionaires, well, then, you know, it would all work, right? We wouldn't have any problems. But like you say, these these little innocent kids who have done nothing to nobody, now all of a sudden, get to see mommy and daddy obliterated, or they themselves get obliterated, like, so many we hear about in wars all over the place. So what is going on? Well, again, what most of the positive thinkers don't want to even consider, because it's just not appropriate, is that there could be some pre-existing energies we all are dragging around. In fact, what's really interesting, if you look at the tree of life in the Kabbalah, and I'm talking in the ancient Kabbalah here, not the modern one, the point is there's a dashed kind of a demarcation where Saturn is. And even in astronomy, if you look at Saturn, really dense, a lot of rings, very, very constricting looking. Saturn appears to be the end of the reality system, and it's also the last visible planet. You can't see, you can see it if you got really good eyes with the naked eye. It looks like a star, but it's the last of the visible planets. Everything else you need a telescope with. And of course, to see Saturn, well, you need a telescope. But the point I'm trying to get to is that Saturn, I believe, the tree of life shows the resonance that we came in with as souls. And I don't think astrology, again, is, we are not the astrology. We created the astrology we came in on. And that parallels precisely the ancient documents in particularly India, which, again, the Upanishads and the Rig Veda all speak to this stuff. There's many, many different documents. And there are some Egyptian documents that speak to this too, and Kabbalistic documents, where we created, and this is why the religions were right, thinking not just positive, but thinking divinely and enduring is good. But what I don't agree with, George Carlin might have been right when he said the best thing that came out of the religions was the music, because it's not that I disagree with all what they've done, but they've demonized anything to do with looking at where you're at other than their methods. So back to positive thinking, if we could maybe introduce the law of resonance, which now opens up, if you have a lot of negative karmas on you, which people do, and I see this in Vedic astrology all the time. In Beverly Hills, you said I was there 10 years. I was actually there a lot longer than that, closer to 30 collectively. And I'm still over there a lot. But the point is that I've had people who've come in, and I've looked at in the Vedic astrology, there's something called dashas. They're called time lords. They're breathtaking, how accurate they are. And I've said, my God, what happened to you? You've just been through one of the worst times in the world. Everything from satanic ritual abuse to other just atrocious things. And then other people would come in, and I go, oh my God, this has been bliss. And yes, you're right, it's been the most divine time of my life. And when you say to them, I'll bet it started right about here, the knowledgeable ones know I'm not predicting the future. They know I'm seeing when their chart shifted. Anybody can see if you learn the techniques, especially if you have the tools. And the interesting thing is it's a language, and why would it work? It couldn't have any power or efficacy unless there were some forces upon us that we can't see, that no amount of rationalization, positive thinking, or other things could make it go away. But interestingly enough, if you get aware of it, you can alter like a good, and that's what they teach you in Reiki, martial arts, Qigong, all these different modalities, in particularly martial arts, is how to take an adverse energy and turn it into a positive. And you can only do that if you first become aware of what energy is and what you have coming at you. It's assessment and reaction, just like defensive driving. Oh, there's a Mack truck running a red light. What should we do? Hit brake, stop. Mack truck goes by. If you're on the phone talking away and you don't see the Mack truck, you're probably going to have a really bad day. And that's the point. So the religions have just washed it all away. It's all the work of the devil. Okay. And the positive thinkers, all they want you to do is think positive. No matter what happens, if the world blows up, just think positive. Well, I got a problem with that too. because there are forces on us all that aren't just rationalized away, even if you don't believe it. And I'm not here to save anybody, but I do feel honored to be able to help people at least see. I had a psychiatrist recently who moved from a particular location and heard of my work. He come to me and says, "What the heck is going on?" I said, "Well, I don't know. Let me look." So I usually spend about a half an hour, 40 minutes before I get on the phone with somebody. And I ran all his progressions and location astrology. And I said, "You just moved in a really challenging place." And then he leans over and he says, "Well, I can't tell anybody, but I'm actually on medication for the first time in my life because I don't know what the heck's going on." I said, "Well, you just moved on a Moon-Pluto latitude crossing. These are your own personal ley lines." And he goes, "That's got to be it." And then he read the description, and he goes, "Oh, my God, that's exactly how I feel." Well, there you go. So you can rationalize and think positive all you want. If you're standing on your head in the Colorado River, you might want to get out of the river, or at least get a raft, or figure out a way to contend with the flow of the river. So that's the point. And you know what he said? He said, "I can't move. I just bought a place. I got a house now. I got to practice." But he said, "This helps me understand that it's not me. It's something I'm experiencing." And it didn't make it go away, but it totally changed his reaction. And he's coping much, much better now. And I get this a lot. So that's not what I'd call positive thinking. That's called rational thinking.
Right.
Or you could say conscious self-aware thinking.
You've been able to help people a lot.
I'd rather fly with an airline. What's that?
Go ahead.
Just reaffirm. I'd rather fly with an airline pilot who's looking at every contingent possibility and being self-aware than just thinking positive.
I gotcha. Well, you've been able to help a lot of people with these understandings, and you do consultations with individuals, and you'll look at their location astrology. You'll look at whatever they want, interrogation astrology, and people really benefit from this, both spiritually, emotionally, and I know people who have firsthand. That's how I got involved with you, and learned about some of what you had to say, and it intrigued me because, Jeff, you know this. We've talked off air. I'm a skeptic. I'm not one who typically is, somebody into astrology and that kind of thing. But
I actually like that better.
Yeah, and I know you do, and I appreciate that because I consider myself to be open-minded, but at the same time critically minded, because I don't want to just accept it. And this show thus far has provided a lot of insights that I think have helped to better understand, and I hope my listeners understand it better now, or if they've understood it all along, well, they're ahead of the curve. But you do want people to reach out to you and get in touch with you. And how can they do that? I know you have a website and all that.
Yeah, the best way is at my website. It's jeff@jeffharman.com. It's Harman. But yeah, I mean that's the thing. And what's interesting is I never really wanted to do this. It's like I've always been in the entertainment business, and I still have a small motion picture company, and I really love that stuff. But I find that this must have been my path because I keep doing it, and when it helps somebody, I walk away. And I always still have a little problem saying, yeah, I'm a quote-unquote astrologer. I always like to look at myself more as a spiritual consultant because I don't use astrology exclusively. I use There's an old story. It's called The Eagle and the Lark. The lark said, if I could get up next to God, I could really see the angels and I could bridge the gap intuitively. And the eagle is the astrology. And that's why I kind of look at the lark as the spirituality and the eagle is the foundational work that gets you up there. And, I often find I'm encouraging people and helping them with their problems through astrology rather than just doing astrology. It's a tool that helps bridge the gap.
Interesting.
And, it's like, compatibility on people is amazing. Like, I've seen people who are either married or getting married. And with Vedic astrology, it's way more complex than just your sun signs. You can literally see whether you're emotionally compatible, logically compatible, physically compatible, or if one's going to dominate someone, or they're going to be really congenial and open. And obviously, when people get into relationships, they do so for a reason. And usually, I believe there's karma involved. And of course, that gets into this whole soulmate thing. But what I find is there's an ancient system in the Kabbalah. The first year of the marriage is the sun. The second year is the moon. So the first year you're planting seeds. The second year is the moon. You're nurturing those seeds. The third year is Mars. And that's, of course, when action happens one way or another. And the 7-year itch comes from Saturn. So everybody's always happy when they first meet. It says, what are you going to be doing 3 years from now, 7 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 14? That's the multiples of Mars and Saturn. And it's interesting where the compatibility really shows up, because all relationships will go through trials and tribulations. It's the ones that are, like psychology always had a phrase that I really liked. The most dangerous relationships are the ones you need. The ones you don't need are the most healthy, meaning that if you have autonomy in your relationship, you're much better off to be happy, because that way no one's making you happy or completing you, because then you give the person power, and that's what they call a codependent relationship. Well, astrology is really useful to see where you might or the other person might be doing that, and then what do? Just like the airline pilot, you make corrective measures, and you don't crash, which is divorce. I always say the American legal system's the finest system money can buy, and that's the last place you want to be in a relationship if you
Sure.
can do it, especially when children are involved. So I love being able to help people. I do a lot of wedding elections, too. Now, electional astrology is picking auspicious times at which to commence an act, like file a corporation, take a trip, market your house, buy a house, move into a house, or marry. And I can tell you, in fact, I've got some really interesting studies on various celebrities who've gotten married at certain times, and it was just like, oof, this is not going to work. And like, here's a good example. If the time that you're pronounced man and wife, the moment in time that happens, if the ruler of the eastern horizon, wherever you did that, and the western horizon are not in harmony, which means in good geometric aspect, you then really have to look at the moon, and if that's not doing something good, you can just about bet that the amount of degrees that is from having a malefic aspect is the amount of months or years you're going to have trouble. If they're really well aspected, it invariably goes well. So what electional astrology is picking auspicious times to get married. And I've had a lot of people that I've done that for, and it's always worked out well. And even if they decided for some odd reason to not carry through, they ended very amicably. They just went on, and it was speed. It wasn't this horrendous malefic thing.
Interesting. Well, you help with that. You help with people trying to get a hold of an understanding about their own personal finances. You help with just about anything, health-related issues, if people want to seek.
Yeah, astrology can really, interrogation astrology is just a toolbox. It really is. I have so many fascinating ancient documents where court astrologers, one of my favorite is a man named Rabbi Ibn Ezra. And for anyone who thinks astrology is the work of the devil, I would ask them to consult their Bibles, because they'll see something in there called Ezra, E-Z-R-A, Ibn Ezra. That is a man who did the commentary on the Psalms and in many places in the Old Testament. He was one of the most sought-after court astrologers in the 15th century. And that's a matter of historical documentation. In fact, there's a critical translation of Jerusalem right now that is pretty astounding stuff. Medical astrology, elections he did for coronations for kings. Napoleon was so enamored by his Psalter that he wrote in the city of Parma, Italy, that he paid exorbitant prices to get his hands on it. And these astrologers, even though many people don't think so, were prized. These emperors would haul them around and pay them all kinds of money to tell them when it was good to go to war, do a coronation, or some major changes. I have one in particular in Italy. His name was Guido Bonatti. He's one of the more well-known ones because of the publishing that he. And you have to remember, there's many astrologers will never know their names because they just never, back then, had the printing press to print things. So you had to be very wealthy to create these manuscripts and document them. And of course, from the 1500s forward with the printing press, it was much more prevalent. But by then, it was almost over. So Guido Bonatti was a real rarity. He wrote 16 or 1700 pages of medical astrology, electional astrology, and interrogation astrology. And he has in there where he'd have a king say to him, should we go to war against Aleutians? And he would tell them, no, you will lose. Well, we're going anyways. And they would go and they'd lose. Or there's so many other examples. It's just amazing. Like they would tell them right out of the castle at exactly this time, and the general would be all nervous. Well, how can this be? We're outnumbered by hundreds, and they've got superior, artillery or what have you. Of course, back then it was stones and oil and arrows, but nonetheless, they'd win because he would tell them when to ride out. And it's pretty astounding, the detail that is extent in that. And medical astrology, oh my God, that's another one too. And again, I'm not making this stuff up. This is historical documents.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to have to touch base in a bit from now and see what has happened and take a look at what's to come still, because I feel like we've only sort of touched the tip of the iceberg here with our talk today. But I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope people check out Jeff Harmon's website. Jeff Harman, you spell his last name Harman, jeffharman.com is the website. You'll be able to get in touch with him there. He has also got a great email update that you can register for at jeffharman.com. Check out his email updates. Jeff, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. We'll have to do it again.
All right. Well, it sounds great, and thanks for having me on. And I like your questions, too, especially that one on the positive thinking.
Awesome stuff. All right, Jeff. Take care.
You as well, Bob. Bye now.